flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Nestle, roll call, please. Counselor Augsburger. Present. Counselor Bronston.
Present.
Counselor Hagee.
Here.
Counselor Richards. Counselor Sanchez. Here. President Pro Tem Thorstad. Mayor Coleman. Present. Committee Member Miller. Committee Member Dahl. Committee Member Brianna. Committee Member Bechtel. Committee Member Gerson. Committee Member Marvin. Committee Member White.
Let the record show that we have 8 present and what is that, 6 absent?
7. Thanks.
So the first thing on our agenda tonight is to elect a chair for the budget committee for the next 2 days.
So we can accept nominations.
Oh, can I nominate Dawn? There's a wide range to choose from here tonight.
Right?
Yeah, we
Second.
have- All right, we have a nomination
really
and a
nice.
second. And so. All right. So Cecily, would you please call for a vote?
Counselor Bronson.
Yes.
Counselor Hagee.
Yes.
Counselor Richards.
Of course.
Counselor Sanchez.
Yes.
President Pro Tem Thorstad.
Yes.
Mayor Coleman.
Yes.
Committee Member Miller.
Okay.
And Counselor Augsburger.
Yes. Let the record show that we have 8 ayes.
I have one question.
Yeah.
Did all these people not show up so that they didn't get stuck with that? I mean.
Possibly, no.
No.
I was going to call for further nominations, but since there were none, that means you are the chair. So I'm just going to pass this over to you.
Oh, good. Oh, this is just. amazing.
It's just getting better.
It's what? Oh, good. Oh, oh. So good. So, okay, thanks, Adam. That's just great. So I push this little button here. Is it,
You're on now.
I'm on. Oh,
If the
yay.
light is on, you're on.
oh, okay. Well, lucky for me. So what do I do, people?
So the next item of business is approval of last year's minutes. So we'll entertain a motion and a second and a vote.
So moved as recommended.
Second.
Boom.
Counselor Hagee.
Yes.
Counselor Richards.
Yes.
Counselor Sanchez. Yes. President Pro Tem Thorstad.
Yes.
Mayor Coleman.
Yes.
Committee Member Miller.
Yes.
Counselor Augsburger.
Yes.
Counselor Bronson.
Yes.
Matt, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great. Are you ready to get started with the slide presentation? Oh, I'm so sorry. Actually, the next item on the agenda is public comment. So Chair, if you'd like to open up the floor for any public comment.
Okay. Huh? Repeat. Opening the floor for public comment.
And hearing none, we'll move on to the presentation.
Great.
So I apologize, I cannot see the slideshow that is being presented, so I'm assuming you are on the general fund slide right now? Or are you on the all fund slide?
Give Adam 1 minute. I think it's still trying to share.
Okay,
How about now, Matt? Can you see it?
I can see it now. So you can go to the next slide. And so I think I am driving in, but we have identified 2 meeting dates tonight and tomorrow to spread out the information to ensure that there is enough time for all committee members and the city council to make sure that all of your questions are answered and that you understand the document, and that the department managers have enough time to explain any of the information to you. So hopefully this is okay with everyone for tonight and tomorrow. And then with the intention that tomorrow night we will go ahead and hopefully pass the budget, approve the budget for the city council to look at adopting at a future date, as well as approving the tax rate for the property taxes for the general fund, as well as the local option revenue. Are there any questions about that?
No questions.
If there are, okay. So Adam, you can go to the next slide. So you've already voted for a chair. Congratulations. I am going to assume that it is a safe assumption that you will be at the meeting tomorrow, which means the committee may not need a vice chair. Would that be appropriate?
Appropriate.
Okay. So we can go ahead and move to the next slide. And you've already held public comment for, well, I'm sorry, have you approved the minutes from the previous meeting?
Yes, we have.
Okay, so you can go on to the next slide. And I believe you've already held public comment and there were none?
Correct.
All right, thank you. We'll move on to the next slide. So this is the time when I would hand it back to the city manager, Jason, to give his budget message for the 25-26 fiscal year. And so I will hand it off to Chief Ogden to present that budget message to the budget committee.
Thanks, Matt. So I'm not going to read the entire thing, but I want to highlight the key moments in the budget message that I created. So I just want to say good evening, Mayor and Council and Budget Committee and Sweet Home residents. It's my pleasure to present the proposed budget for fiscal year 2025 and 2026. And this year's budget reflects our city's commitment to transparency, responsible stewardship, and strategic investment. The total proposed budget stands at $41.3 million, and it aligns directly with our council's adopted goals centered around efficient government, economic strength, essential services, and infrastructure and community enhancement. This includes efforts like enhancing cybersecurity, supporting downtown redevelopment, and launching significant capital projects such as the Mahler Wastewater Treatment Plant and the Mountain View Multi-Use Path. Street repair remains a high priority. This year, we're initiating a pavement preservation strategy that focuses on maintaining our streets in a fair to good condition based on proven approaches from some other Oregon cities. And we're also planning renovations to the east wing of City Hall here, advancing library development and continuing our commitment to community assets like Weddell Bridge. Our general fund is proposed at $7.71 million, reflecting new grant revenue and strategic consolidation of services. Enterprise funds, including water, sewer, and stormwater, remain stable and in alignment with our long-range master plans. And then as we look ahead, this budget positions Sweet Home for resilience and long-term sustainability. It balances current service demands with future preparedness and keeps us competitive for state and federal funding. And so with that, I just want to extend a sincere thank you to our finance director, Matt Brown, to all the city staff for their hard work and dedication in helping prepare this budget for this year. And I just also want to thank council and the budget committee for your leadership and engagement as well. And we look forward to working together the next couple of nights to refine and adopt this plan for Sweet Home's continued growth and prosperity. And I believe we're handing it back to you, Matt.
Thank you. Can you go to the next slide, Adam? So, briefly, I just wanted to go over the intention and goals of the Budget Committee as we meet over these next couple nights. At the heart of the Budget Committee, you have two essential questions to answer when reviewing this document. The first is that as a finance director and the city manager for the committee and the city council, we have to present you with a balanced budget. This means that revenue should always equal expenses. The second question, which is really at the heart of the Budget Committee's purpose, is to ensure that the budget that we have presented reflects the goals of the City Council. So just as Chief Ogden recognized during his comments, all of the programs, services, and staffing that is put into the budget is with the intention to achieve the goals and the values that the City Council sets forth. And so the Budget Committee is there to ensure that the budget aligns with those strategic goals. And so just as a general reminder, the staff will present you with a proposed budget that you have tonight. The Budget Committee will approve the document. It will then be sent to the City Council for review and adoption. Legally, we have to adopt the city budget by the end of June 30th before the new fiscal year begins in July. Any questions over that? Hearing none, I guess, Adam, you can go to the next slide. So I will talk briefly just for those that may be new to governmental finance and as a review for some of the other folks on the committee and the City Council. We break up all of our funding of revenues and expenditures into what I like to refer to as buckets. And each bucket has a specific type of revenues and expenses that it can receive and spend. So for the City of Sweet Home, through the Oregon Revenue and Statutes, we've identified 5 buckets that you have multiple funds that are sitting in. The first and most allowable fund that you have is the general fund. This is where you as a city government have the most flexibility in what you spend your resources on. Most of the revenue that comes in here are your general property taxes. It is also the home of departments that typically cannot sustain themselves through their own source of revenues that they bring. These revenues are pooled together to pay for those services like finance, parks, administration, and those types of things. As we move from left to right, the buckets become more constrained about what you can and cannot spend money on. So for the special revenue funds, you have funds such as your police fund, your library fund, community enhancement, streets funds, all the funds that you see listed there. These have prescribed revenues that you specifically receive for a purpose. So as an example, when we're talking about the police fund, you receive property tax for that fund and for those services. It would be illegal and unethical for you to spend those dollars on helping replace a main water replacement out of your public works department. For the system development charges, which is the orange bucket, these are again specific revenues that you're receiving for development fees for improvements to the system for new customers that come in and attach to already existing infrastructure. So you are charging a fee to developers. Those fees must be used in a certain specific way to ensure that you are held ethically and legally okay in spending those funds in the way of intent. For your enterprise funds, these are your water, sewer, and your storm funds. These are really the area where governments have the opportunity to act most like a business. So a water, sewer, and storm fund, obviously you're well familiar with your utility bills, and you have a fee on those utility bills for each of these services. You may act in the capacity of a government more like a business with these enterprise funds in that you have flexibility in what type of operations you want to run, what capital improvements you want to do, and it also ensures that as you collect those funds for each water, sewer, and storm, that you are using those funds within the system. So you're not collecting water revenue and spending it on a storm replacement system, or taking sewer revenue and putting it towards your water treatment or your water plant. The last set of buckets on the far right are your internal service funds. These are two funds that you have that honestly do not have a lot of money in them. However, they are restricted to the money that you bring into them. So these internal service funds get their revenue from other funds. Most generally, the general fund, you will see transfers going from the general fund into the internal service funds to help fund the programs and services that you may have within those funds. So at the bottom, I've taken your current projected budget of what we have for you in the proposed budget and kind of identified how much of each of those buckets you have within the city of Sweet Home. Can I answer any questions that you may have about anything that I just talked about?
I don't think there's any questions, Matt.
Okay, cool. We'll go ahead and move to the slide, and I am just passing A&W, so I will be there in about 5 minutes. So those percentages that you saw on the previous page of the funds, this is just a graphical representation of how much money those funds accumulate to as a whole pie chart of the entire city budget. If there's no questions, Adam, you can welcome to go to the next slide. So, as we go through the budget process, I want to make sure to let you guys know that if you have questions about specific departments or specific line items that you see in the budget, I want to encourage you to speak up. As soon as I get there, I'll be able to see your hand raised or however you'd like to get my attention while I'm either in the car or sitting in the room. But I want to encourage you to ask questions. Staff is there and available to answer questions as best we can. I would ask for grace, though, in that you may ask a question that we do not have all the information on at this moment, but we will definitely work on gathering that information to give you an answer to your question by the end of tomorrow. So, as I mentioned earlier, the general fund is made up of several departments that don't necessarily bring in revenue for the city, specifically for their departments. So your administration, your city council expenses and stipends, finance department, court, parks. Community center is a newer department that we moved into the general fund last year. This used to be their own separate fund in the 200 funds, which is those special revenue funds. Because it's such a small area and amount of money, we decided to move it into the general fund to just help consolidate and keep the financial structure clean and clear as possible. So this is the second year that you've seen the community center fund brought into the general fund. We also have general services. Those are operational expenses, professional services, insurance payments, everything that kind of encapsulates many departments all at once. So it wouldn't be fair to put some of those expenses specifically in court or finance and administration. They're more for the general city overall. So we create a general services department that we can put those expenses in. In capital outlay, we have obviously some capital projects that you are working on next door in your city hall, as well as some other potential projects that we can discuss. There is a transfer line item out of $65,000. This $65,000 is all being transferred from the general fund into the special purpose, the community enhancement fund. And if you will allow me a few minutes, I'm going to park my car and come into the building.
Do that.
Thank you.
Hurry, hurry, hurry.
So continuing where I left off, are there any questions that we can start going through either department by department if you'd like? Or if you have just general questions about the general fund overall that staff can answer?
I have some questions.
Yeah.
I have a few.
Okay.
So, reviewing the budget for this year and also comparing it to last year's budget. The first question I have is, regarding our current year, fiscal year budget, how close are we to what we budgeted?
So you are actually pretty on track for what has budgeted. We can provide you, and I can send this to you either electronically or we can have this available for you by tomorrow. As we prepare the budget for next year, we have 2 additional columns that we typically don't show in the budget document, but that is the actuals for where you are as of December, and then we do a projected end of estimated year-end column. And so that will show you how much we estimate that we're going to be, that so you can compare it to the actuals. Overall, you're pretty close to being in line with exactly what was adopted.
Okay, great.
For the most part, overall, there are some specific line items that are off here and there, but as an overall general fund, you are pretty much on track for what was adopted.
That's great to know. Chair, can I ask another question?
Go ahead.
So I saw in the finance department that the budget doubled since 2022 to 23, but the FTEs went down from 3.9 to 2.85. Do we know what caused the budget to increase so much, even though the FTEs went down?
You're going to see a lot of fluctuations as you look back into the actuals. The main reason is because before I started with the city, you had, or not you, but the city had created an internal service fund. And the intention of that was to identify departments that needed to be funded like finance. And so there were expenses within the general fund and the internal services fund. Some of those overlapped, some of those did not. It was somewhat confusing when we tried to kind of define the structure of the funds and put things where we thought they should be. So the actuals from the previous history may not show a very clear picture of what the actual expenses are. When we look back at 22, 23 or 21, 22 or anything before there, it really can get fuzzy as far as this is what we think that line item in the new structure would have been with all the old fund structures. So there was a lot of combining of 5, 6, 10, 12 lines into that one line. So there may be fluctuations where maybe there was a finance expense that we did not hit, but it's shown in administration in 22, 23. The biggest difference, the big thing legally is that we're representing the entire funds that actually hit the general fund and the internal service fund as a whole, but there may be specific line items that we were off just because in the creation of the new fund structure, it gets pretty confusing about what should have gone where. So that's likely why you're seeing the difference of the fluctuations if you look back at those histories.
Makes a lot of sense. Thank you for that clarification. One more question, if I may, for the general fund. The $30,000 for the community center, are we now covering something for the community center, or is that something that's been, it showed in the last year's budget and this year's budget, and I was curious about that $30,000.
Yeah, those are the utility costs that are billed to the city, but they get reimbursed by the tenants there. And then also we have the local transportation related grant that requires the city match. And historically, we've been covering that. So.
Okay, so that's what's reflected there. That's great. Thank you so much. That's it.
Question back to Jason here. Okay, back to the community center, but the transportation match, that's not in that $30,000.
No.
That's in another fund. That is? Because that's about $30,000.
I think it should.
So we got 2 expenses. We got the transportation contribution for match, and we also have the utilities. And they're both about, well, the transportation match, I think, is 30,000, is it not?
Correct.
Yeah.
It's 30.
So the utilities must be someplace else unless they're not.
The utilities for the community center are in the general fund. They are part of that $30,000 budget. So in the detailed budget document where you get to see the actual department line items, you'll see $25,000 for utilities and $5,000 for professional services. So the community center utilities do get a bill for the city that we pay, but then that's reimbursed on the back end.
I understand that. So I ran that. Both of those, the community center and the transportation center. That's what I'm saying. These two numbers are there, but but if it's represented that way, it should be about 60,000.
They are the same. So the $30,000 that you're looking at for the transportation fund is shown as a revenue in the community enhancement fund, which is 207 with the expense. It's kind of a pass through of that $30,000. So we're getting that in and then expending it out, but that's shown in the special revenue fund, not in the general fund.
The utility portion. So just the 30,000 is the expense that is the match for grants then.
Correct.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
This is the biggest fund of your city, so I want to make sure and allow enough time for you to ask any other questions, because the rest of the presentation goes somewhat pretty fast.
So Chair, may I? Did we have a budget prior that was $97 million? And now we have a $41 million, and that's what changed?
So several things. The biggest thing is a change in, I would say, the management's ability to show appropriations. When you passed a budget last year that was almost $100 million, that included appropriations for one of your biggest ticket items, which is your water treatment plant. That was a sizable loan that increased appropriations. So we, as a city, adopted a budget showing that we were going to receive those revenues and expense those revenues. So your appropriation level included roughly about $60 million, $30 million of those funds. Also, for SDCs and many other funds, the previous city manager approved appropriations that you may not have officially received at the time. The intention was that you were applying for grants, you were going to get those monies eventually, to approve those appropriations so that you could start spending as soon as you got approval for those grants. So that increases the appropriations level. What Chief Ogden has done this year is take a more realistic look at what your actual appropriations level would be. We also took the practice of, yes, we know that you're going to apply for grants, and some you may get or some you may not. But for the most part, for the grants that whatever you think you may apply for, we did not appropriate funds at that time because we haven't been approved yet. And so that's a change in practice from the previous administration.
So that back then was kind of aspirational, whereas this is realistic.
Essentially, yes.
I just needed you to break it down in normal person's
Correct.
language.
Yeah.
Because I don't understand half of what you said.
Last year's budget adoption was very aspirational as far as what we're going to receive in expense, specifically with grant funds.
Okay. And then how does that change reflect what we're going to do forward with the wastewater treatment facility?
So you are still waiting on a couple documents to be able to apply for that loan, most specifically the fiscal 23 audit, which I'm working on right now with the auditors, trying to prepare the general ledger trial balance to give to the auditors after we had some additional cleanup items from the auditors. Long story short, but once we finish the fiscal year 23 audits, we can take those financial statements, include them in the application of the WIFIA loan. Once we get approval for the WIFIA loan, the intention is to bring back to the city council a supplemental budget that would include the appropriations for that project to get started with the known amount as well as the rates and repayment schedule for that loan. So we would come back with a supplemental budget when that time comes.
That's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
Question on that very thing. So in the future, we'll call it the $60 million project. As those expenses are occurred, and we go and we'll be paying those. So those are going to be reflected in the financials budget for each year as that project goes through?
As the project occurs. Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Typically, from my knowledge of the previous application when we did put it in, the idea was that you were going to receive the entire loan amount up front and then you would expend it over the next couple of years of doing the project. So similarly, we would come to you with a supplemental budget of what that loan is. If whatever is not spent, it would carry over into your next year's beginning fund balance. So it will inflate your sewer fund balance or the funding and expenditures appropriations for the city for the next several years until that project is fully spent out.
Thank you.
Chair, may I one more? So I guess if I'm hearing you right, just so I can make sense of it and people in the community can make sense of it, we just had a change in management and a change in practices. So we can, because it looks like we cut the budget by $50 million,
Yeah.
but we are growing expenses twice as fast. So that just, how do we reconcile that when we talk to people, or in normal terms, like we change city managers and we're changing practices?
I would say it's a philosophical approach that has changed, and we just felt that it was better for the community to see a realistic budget. And again, we do know we're going to have to come back with a supplemental budget, but I also know that that number was surprising to folks, and it was more complicated to explain that number last year.
So I'm just going to clarify as well, so I can also explain it. So last year we anticipated getting a $60 million loan. And so that's why it looked to be $97 million, was because we anticipated that, even though we did not have it yet. And that was included in the budget.
Correct.
Yes, and we still anticipate getting that, but we're just going to
We're
approach
just going to
the
do
process
the
differently.
supplement. Yep. Great. Thank you. Chair, I have another question,
Go ahead.
because I realized that my other list of questions actually falls under the general fund as well. So I think the question I'm sure you may have gotten a copy of all my questions. But what is the benefit of moving a abatement from economic development to admin?
That is specifically related to the approval process of invoices and POs in the financial system. For the city manager Ogden or deputy city manager Cecily to approve those invoices in Springbrook, the expense has to be within the fund structure that they have approval overseeing. And
Perfect.
so we've moved the abatement to administration because that is the budget that they oversee financially in the system.
Thank you.
What?
I've got more, but absolutely. Yeah.
Any other questions in the general fund?
Chair, may, okay. So what's the material and services mean?
Materials and services accounts for essentially stuff. Personnel services would be people. Materials and services is stuff that is not capital outlay. So capital outlay item is anything that is over $10,000 that has a useful life longer than 1 year. Anything that would be materials and services would fall under like general operating supplies. This could be anything from pens and paper to memberships of professional development agencies, could involve training, could involve operationals. I mentioned operational supplies, professional services, contracts. So myself, I'm listed in materials and services as professional services. But at the end of the day, materials and services is stuff. On the individual department pages, we do break out the materials and services into specific categories that are pretty standard across all funds. We try and keep everything as categorized as appropriate as we can, so that if you ever have a question of how much do we pay in professional services across the city, then in our financial system, we can pull that specific line item and it shows us everything in professional services for the entire city, as opposed to having one number here and one number here, and then having to pull 20 different reports to get you an answer.
I feel like the more we explain this, the better people can understand it.
Yeah,
So-
absolutely.
And it's all combined and a
It
little
is.
bit
And
commingled. So trying to make sense of it for others is important.
yeah, and especially when we do the presentation and you're looking at a slideshow, looking at it at the larger, 30,000 foot level on a presentation, as opposed to being able to identify in the document the specific line items, can be very telling. And so when you're able to explain what materials and services are, which operating supplies, just looking at a few items here, utilities, professional development, professional services, projects and programs, fuel, facility maintenance, it's all the stuff.
Question on unappropriated funds. Almost all of the funds have a substantial amount in it. Could you expand on what is in there?
So you have two types of what you would probably generally refer to as savings or reserves.
Mhm.
And within every fund, you have a contingency account and you have an unappropriated account.
Mhm.
Legally, you can determine what amounts you want in either of those accounts. They can be zero or they can be the entire amount of whatever the expenditures would be. Contingency amounts means you as a city council are not appropriating it to a specific level, like personnel services or materials and services, but you want to have that money available in case a rainy day comes and, oh, hey, I've spent all materials and services and COVID happened and I need to transfer some money over to be able to spend. So we would bring you back a supplemental budget to move money from contingency into materials and services that allows you the appropriation level to actually spend those funds. When you put money into an unappropriated account, that means that at a city level, you are not appropriating any of those funds to be spent. It also means that once you as a city council adopt a budget, those unappropriated funds cannot be spent unless there is an actual natural disaster that is declared. So COVID was a national disaster that was declared by the governor so that agencies could use unappropriated funds and move those over to expense. Under normal circumstances, you would not have the ability to spend any of those dollars in the unappropriated listing accounts. So a great example are SDC funds. When you see a unappropriated amount for system development charges, this is another example of a change in philosophy from the previous administration. In my practice, I would typically actually appropriate 100% of all SDC funds because I want the flexibility and availability to spend those dollars if a project or situation comes up that is SDC eligible. We've taken the approach here with this budget to be realistic, or as realistic as we can be when predicting the future, that we're likely not going to spend $1.2 million in water SDC funds this next year. That's probably not realistic. We may spend a couple $100,000 if we have an SDC eligible project coming up, but it would be more appropriate to keep some of those monies in unappropriated to ensure that it continues to roll over into the next year. When you see unappropriated funds used, especially in the general fund, that is typically used by cities and organizations to ensure that they have a beginning fund balance for the next year. You'll see oftentimes that cities will set a reserve policy of a specific amount or a percentage, and they will put that in unappropriated funds to ensure that they have that money set aside for next year starting forward.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Chair, may I?
Go ahead.
Or you go.
Yeah.
Are we putting any money in interest-bearing accounts and growing any of it? And what's the growth? And I know it's probably not this, but we have money that's not being allocated anywhere, so we should be growing it.
Correct. So you have two main places where we see investments. Most of your interest revenue goes into your general fund. You have a portion of those interest revenues that are split up among the police fund, the library fund, your water utility funds. We try to appropriate the interest across all funds that are contributing to the money that's coming in. So money that you get for the property tax levy or the local option levy for your police or library, a portion of those funds and those interest revenues goes to the police and to the library and to the water fund for all those monies coming in. The two main sources where you receive interest is the local government investment pool. That is where you actually see most of your money being received. It's where all your property tax revenue goes. It's also where all of your revenue for revenue sharing goes into the local government investment pool. Those rates adjust every probably 3 or 4 months, or specifically when the Fed changes their rate. Typically, those rates over the past couple years have been anywhere from 3 to 5%. The last couple years, they've been really good, upwards in the higher fours. So you've received a fair amount of decent revenue back in interest for those monies. You keep on hand roughly $10 to $15 million as a whole on any kind of given day. So you're receiving a monthly interest on those revenues coming in. The other area where you receive interest is that we may take a portion of those funds that we know you're not going to spend on a regular basis. So if we know that payroll is generally, say, $500,000 a month, so we're going to make sure we have that in our bank account so that we can make payroll every single month, make sure that we can pay all of our bills and AP and that kind of stuff. But the money that's just sitting in the local government investment pool, there's still opportunities out there that we can reinvest those funds to receive higher interest rates. And that's where the city contracts with a firm called GPA. So government portfolio investment managers. You will actually see probably a new contract coming up soon for them. They've been working with the city for a few years. Their contract is coming up. They would like to come and kind of give a presentation of what they do, how they've been doing, what kind of stuff they're investing in. Now, you're not investing in anything like the stock market or anything like that. You're mainly investing in bonds. And so those bonds could range anywhere from 1 to 5 years. And they do a wide range of varieties to kind of give you some flexibility in what cash you have available if you ever need to pull anything out. But those bond investments are typically trying to invest and beat the local government investment pool. Typically, the longer you invest, so if you buy a 5-year CD, those rates are typically higher than a 1-year bond. So we try and kind of fluctuate depending on what's available in the market. GPA handles those investment firms or investments that we choose on a regular basis, and then they invest those funds. The interest payments come back to the city, and then we kind of diverse all of those out into the specific funds like the general fund, police, library, water. Does that kind of answer your question?
And is that interest line item in here about what we've
It is in the
received on this?
detail. So in the general fund over in,
Page 18.
so it's categorized under miscellaneous revenue. In the general fund, you are estimating to get about $500,000 next year. This current year, we adopted a budget of $400,000. I'm happy to report that we are estimating at the year end that you will receive almost $1 million, $950,000 in interest revenue. So well over what we adopted. The reason for me putting $500,000 is because unfortunately we do anticipate some market fluctuations coming up. And so to adjust for that and to ensure that we don't over budget revenue, we are conservative on the side of what interest you're going to get in. I assume you will likely get a little bit above 5, but I'm not sure how much. It just really depends on the market.
Just to clarify, is that the only line where interest is reflected, or is there another line and all of those other funds?
So you will see an interest line item in Fund 100, which is your general fund. You'll see it in 200 and 201. So those are your police funds, your library funds, and then your enterprise funds for 500, 550, and 560. So your water, sewer, and storm, you will see interest line items.
Thank you.
Any other questions? If not hearing any, I guess we will move forward to the next fund. So the next fund, I'd like to give an opportunity for Chief Ogden to speak. This is the Public Safety Fund on page 24 of your document. The summary of those items are highlighted on the presentation that you see, but I'll allow Chief Ogden to talk about any updates to his public safety department and budgets and what's happening this year and potentially into the next year.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. As you can see in our public safety fund, that our biggest expense, as always, is our personnel. We are not increasing any staff. We did budget last year the part-time CSO position, which we recently we filled that in the last couple of months, and that is working out very well for us. I want to thank council for that. Materials and services, 920,000 capital outlay, 200,000. The 200,000 in capital outlay is, I'm hoping I've set aside funds for a grant match for a generator / solar resiliency program. Basically, for the what was it? Congressional spending request and the state spending requests. I've submitted applications for the solar resiliency program. I did receive some feedback from the congressional spending request, requesting some more information on that. So I was able to get that to them. So I'm hopeful that we might get that. So if so, then that's what we'll use that $200,000 for that grant match. And then contingency, we're at about 1.1 million, and then the unappropriated is 1.9 million. So we don't have any major capital improvement plans at the PD this year. We were able to finish up most everything in 2 years as far as the updates go. We just have some general upkeep that we'll probably be doing, maybe some crack sealing to the parking lots. We want to update and make our landscaping a little bit better. That's been run down a little bit, but we have a plan in place to get that up and running. But other than that, it's pretty much the same. Not many changes there. So happy to answer any questions that you might have on that. I will say that some of our, there was some increase in the IT charges. This year, our Justice, which is our program that we use for report writing, Justice Connect is similar, only it's the mobile version of that. There were some increases in cost there. What else? Oh, our policy and procedures through Lexipol, you'll note that there was an increase in that line item this year just because we're using Lexipol to put out monthly daily training bulletins. So it's a really simple way for staff to get some training hours throughout the month. There's like a scenario that they throw out every day attached to a policy, and then there's a little test at the end. So that's why that was increased there. Some facility maintenance costs are going up, like fire sprinkler service that we have to do. Generator maintenance, we always have generator maintenance every year to make sure that it's running okay. Fire alarm inspection, electrical, grounds, plumbing repairs, so that. And then you'll notice that we had a significant increase in the enterprise fleet fund. And the reason for that is we have been slowly, over the last couple of years, converting our patrol fleet over to enterprise. And so that way they're handling everything. we get the best deals that we can on the vehicles that we order. A couple of years later, they're able to sell them at a pretty competitive price, and then we take that money and put it right back into the fund. And so it's been working out pretty well for us. So those, you probably note some of those increases in those line items, and that's why. So.
Chief Ogden, if I can just add a couple things with your budget. As you'll see in the police fund, library fund, and also your water, sewer, and storm fund, we talked about contingency funds earlier. Typically, it has been a best practice in operational funds like police, library, and especially your public works funds is to have a reserve amount just in case. And typically, the best practice has been to identify at least 3 months of operating expenses to keep you moving forward in case anything should happen and not be available. So that $1.15 million is essentially that 3 months moving forward to have in contingency. The other thing that I just wanted to make you aware of is, as most of you may be aware, you increased the local option levy rate this past year to the full amount. So that is shown here, and we've actually now had a full year of implementation of that full rate to see the amount. We had initially adopted a budget of $3.8 million. This was an increase from the previous years that were around 3.2, 3.3. But what we're actually estimating by the end of the year will be roughly about $4.2 million for that full local option levy rate. So we typically put about a 2 or 3% increase on property taxes, just in general overall, because of measures 5 and 50, they can't go above 3%. So we typically just adopt a budget the next year with the 3% increase. That's what's reflected here with the 4.35 and just using round numbers for sake. But just to identify and call out that difference, so you know of what the previous rate was with the 3.8 and what we're actually getting at 4.2 with the full local option rate.
Chair, may I? Can you explain, because we have new members, when we chose to not receive the full percentage and then we chose to receive the full percentage, can you explain what that means? And essentially, where did that money go to when we chose not to? I heard that it went to the county regardless, and we just plot it back for ourselves or something like that.
No, the local option levy rate is the county assessing whatever rate that you approve. So the county will collect whatever the tax rate is that you adopt as a city for that rate. So the difference between the reduced amount and the full amount is not collected by the state and then put into another fund for their own keeping or whatever they want to spend on. They just don't collect that difference. So if the difference is, say $1,000 on a house between one rate and the other, the county doesn't get that extra $1,000. That just means the homeowner doesn't have to pay that extra $1,000. When you increase your property tax levy rate to the full amount, you as a city or as a county, they collect that additional $1,000. It's then proceeded passed through to you as an organization. That gives you available resources to increase your staffing, materials and services and items that you may need for your police department. Any other questions for Chief Ogden or myself? Okay. So next fund is the next page, page 25, which is the library fund. And I believe Megan's here. So obviously, Megan is your resident expert as a library director for the city, so I will defer any questions first to her. If you have anything operational wise that you have, the summary information is on the presentation slide, as well as the detailed line item information in your budget document. So I will pass it over to Megan to speak about her department.
So we are not expecting any changes from our previous year's budget. And with our levy that we're asking for in May, we're also not asking for any increase. So the increases would just be whatever's happening. And then the capital outlay, I will leave that one to Matt to explain exactly where that one comes from. But we're not expecting any changes of how we're spending our money right now.
So the capital outlay is, to kind of quote some of the words from earlier, more aspirational in this particular department, just because I know Megan and the council and administration are working on the potential idea of a new library building and what that looks like, as well as improvements to that potential site or a new site and what that may be. So the $850,000 is appropriated for use. However, there are not specific capital outlay projects identified for that amount. So this would be referencing back to more of an aspirational look for this particular fund, and what the future goals for this department and the building are.
And that money does come from a donation.
Correct.
Any questions about libraries or library funds?
No question, but we just want to thank whoever left that money to the library. Big thank you. I know they've passed away, but I'm sure their family. Yeah. Thank you to them.
So again, similar to the police fund, I'll just mention the property tax revenue increase, which was adopted originally at 607. Obviously a lower tax rate than what you're receiving for the police option levy. So 607 was adopted. We estimate that the year end will be about 630, with roughly a 3% increase is what you see on the proposed budget at about $650,000. Any other questions for the library? Okay. We will move forward to the Community Enhancement Fund. So the Community Enhancement Fund is summarized on the table there, or on the presentation. The Community Enhancement Fund includes several departments within it. These departments are the PATH program, special events that the city may hold, the transit grant that was discussed earlier, the any special revenue that is received for parks, as well as the Weddell Bridge funds that are reserved. So these are mainly the departments that make up the community enhancement funds. I'm happy to answer any questions. There's not a whole lot going on in this fund. I will mention the PATH program mainly has a large portion of these funds. You'll see that in the proposed budget, over $1 million is listed as unappropriated. That is specifically for the PATH program, but you do have PATH program funds available for future use if you'd like, or any grant matching projects that may come up that you could use those funds for. But that's the largest department, so to speak, in the Community Enhancement Fund.
Chair, may I ask a question?
Go ahead.
We've had some estimated cost for Weddell Bridge. How accurate are those, and how current is that estimate?
I would say whatever we have is probably not current and not fully accurate. We're still trying to identify the right place to start with the engineering. So I can tell you that what we have appropriated, for example, we added that 75,000 in the current year. That would not be sufficient to do all the work that needs to be done. But we're anticipating it will probably be several $100,000.
So we do have funds that are in unappropriated areas that, if need be, we could earmark them for Weddell Bridge. Yeah,
Correct.
but we don't know that we can get to the fixing of the bridge this year. Is that what I understand?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So you do have the option of using some of those unappropriated funds if you choose to reallocate them, like from the PATH program to Weddell Bridge. That would be at the council's discretion to do. In the current proposed budget, you have, I believe, $80,000 in a what we would call a beginning fund balance for Weddell Bridge, which includes $5,000 from the previous year and the transfer of $75,000 that we're anticipating to do before the end of this fiscal year.
Chair, may I? It was kind of the same as the mayor for the Weddell Bridge. And so why can't we work on it this year?
So just by way of update, we've actually reapplied for historic designation, but that process takes time, and then it will take us some time to identify the additional funding opportunities that will open up. So we're hopeful we can work through all of that this year.
So how much more damage is going to happen to it while we wait, and how much more cost will that add, and what can we do to prevent any of that while we're in the interim? Anything?
So we have had some talks about potentially shutting it to pedestrian traffic to minimize some of that damage. But at this point, with that type of bridge and the open siding, it's subject to the elements. And so, yes, deterioration is an issue with that.
So do we need to put some money into it to do some preservation while we wait, or?
I think we can certainly have that discussion tomorrow when we're back to having a quorum. So I'm sorry you came back, Councilor Richardson. Okay, perfect. So yeah, this is the time. For example, last year it was the action of the committee to move more money into Weddell. I think this would be the venue to do so.
I think it's really important to the community and the council that we do everything that we can to preserve that and not allow any more deterioration, because that's just going to make the costs go up. I don't know what to do.
Sorry, madam.
Go ahead.
Oh, is there just kind of like a round ballpark number of what that cost would be, just kind of off the top of your head?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I can have the latest estimate for you tomorrow.
That'd be great.
That's what I was going to ask, if there's been any engineering studies done on it, what it's going to cost, what the details are. But
So-
you have it tomorrow, so we'll see it then. Thank you.
Okay, well, just very high level. Basically, the only way we've been able to do our estimates is we've spoken to someone in another community that had a similar project. They advised us what they thought of their line items might be similar to our necessary line items. But at this point, the only thorough inspection that's been done has been a visual. So we're not very far in the engineering process.
One more question on that. Since Lynn County just did major works on one of the covered bridges there, is that who you've been working with? And
I don't recall if that's who it is, but I can confirm all that
Okay.
tomorrow.
so,
Yes,
thank you.
that's who it is. Okay. Well, then, Mayor, or Chair, if I
Yeah.
can. Yeah, I'll call
Mayor.
Yeah. Speaking of your grandson, right?
My grandson. I should put him here.
Yeah, yeah. He was so
Go
cute.
ahead.
So we can tomorrow discuss it further once we have that estimate in our hands and then make a decision, because I agree with Councilor Sanchez. We really need to preserve, Weddell Bridge. So it is part of our council goals. So.
Any other questions on the Community Enhancement Fund? Okay, we will save that till tomorrow. The next fund is the Willow Fund, page 28. Pretty simple here and laid out. Again, we adopted a budget with a beginning fund balance of about almost $100,000. This mainly comes from a transfer from the reserve account in previous years to get things started until you got enough engineering plans identified and everything laid out for you to go out for a loan program to pay for the initial cost of it, and then creating a local improvement district, an LID, to be paid back over a certain number of years. So as that project still is in the development phase, we've identified $97,000 that you have remaining of the initial investment that was done through a transfer. And we've put all of those monies into professional services for contractors, engineering, those kind of things to keep things moving forward. Unless Blair has anything to mention, potentially about this project, or anybody else from community development?
So we actually just approved a change order
Oh, you
because
did?
there was some
Okay.
engineering update that
Okay.
needed to be made. So
Great. So not much going in this fund, but happy to answer any other questions that staff can answer. With no more questions, we'll move on to the next one. So our transportation fund, page 29, the summary levels are identified here in the presentation. Main revenue source for the transportation fund is the state gas tax that we all love paying. But that is where the majority of the revenue for this fund comes in. You have a beginning fund balance of just over $800,000. You get a small amount of interest and miscellaneous revenue that comes in, but this pays for a portion of your dedicated transportation staff through Public Works that is identified through a staffing allocation model that we do. So each year, our Public Works Director or city managers and myself sit down with everybody's name on a list in Public Works, and we identify specifically what person each does and how much they do in each fund. So streets, water, sewer, storm, and that helps allocate and break out the cost of that employee by fund specifically. So we review that every year. The updated numbers are shown in the proposed budget. And not sure if Greg wants to come up and speak to anything in transportation. I will allow him to speak about transportation, and then we'll take any questions that you may have.
Not a lot going on in transportation. I think if you look at the budget, I think I'm saving about $1,000 this upcoming year. I think for Matt and all the numbers that we've been getting, it's been able to write a lot better budgets across all the funds. And so that's been very helpful. But if I have any questions, I think other than crack sealing, that's really, it's same as last year.
I do have one question.
Go ahead.
Yeah. The miscellaneous revenue, where does that come from? It's higher this year than it was on previous years, so I was just curious.
Thank you.
I'm looking that way.
You're looking that way. Okay.
I was trying to get our financial system up faster than you could look. And I could tell you specifically. So one thing to keep in mind, and I'll kind of waste a little bit of time as the financial system comes up. One thing to keep in mind in the transportation fund, obviously that's where you do some of your street projects. You'll see the capital outlay of about $100,000. That is pretty low for cities. And we discussed this, and I brought it to the attention of the budget committee last year, just kind of as an FYI. But as you continue moving forward as a city and developing master plans, system development plans, transportation improvement plans, and you identify projects that come up, projects are expensive, especially street projects and public works projects. But for general overlays, street rebuildings, and those kind of things, those can range anywhere from $100,000 to upwards of $1 million. And so as you, if I recall, I believe you are still working on or finalizing the transportation plan. And some of those projects that are listed in that plan, you do not have money to pay for. And so you will be heavily reliant on what grants and outside funding that you can bring in for those transportation projects. It's never a popular subject to talk about how do you increase revenue, because we all know where that's going to go. It's going to be levying more taxes and fees, which most cities don't like to do. So as you continue moving forward, just being aware of those transportation projects that you have identified in your plan and potential opportunities that you may see that you as a council may need to work with your legislature to see what projects could get funded through the state or federal level to be able to accomplish. Are there any other questions?
Yes. looking into the future, if state legislators are going down the path, it looks like there's going to be some increases in fuel tax. Are we looking out 26, 27, or is it 27, 28? When we would actually see some of that revenue to budget? If it was to come through.
Yeah.
I mean, coming back to us, I don't know that it's coming to us.
Well, it's going to, some of it will go into the cities.
I don't know the timing on that, but I can confirm if Director Brown doesn't know.
I'm probably 2 years out then. Okay, thank you.
The miscellaneous revenue that you mainly get is the fund exchange allocation from ODOT, which is an additional payment on top of the state gas tax. So those would be additional appropriations from ODOT that you receive that are not technically gas tax rates, but additional payments that you've received, roughly about 100,000 this last year. And so we're projecting that you'll receive that again.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Any other questions on the transportation fund? Okay. So the next two slides, or next three slides, are all about system development charges. So you have 5 essential SDC funds: water, sewer, storm, transportation, and parks. As I mentioned before earlier in the presentation, these are all made up of system development charges that are typically paid by developers when they come in, and it is their essential shared cost of the infrastructure and improvements that they're putting into the system and to attach onto the system that you have already created. So system development charges are very specific to what you can and cannot spend on. When you do master plans for either your transportation, your water, your sewer, and storm, we typically like to go through those projects and specifically identify what projects are SDC eligible. So this would be anything related to replacement and improvement. A portion of what you're doing as a city for replace and improvement can be SDC eligible, but it must be clearly identified in your master plan for us to spend those dollars. So as you develop new plans and those are coming on board, we're making sure and getting professional opinions on what potential projects are SDC eligible, because if you can spend SDC dollars instead of your water fund dollars or your sewer fund dollars, that means you have more money available to do projects. And so we're working with your master plans that you have right now, as well as the ones that you're developing right now, to specifically identify what projects are SDC eligible so that we can utilize these funds. Oftentimes I see a lot of cities that have accumulated SDC funds in a large excess because they either don't know how to use them or they don't have any avenues to use them.
Chair, may I? Can you explain what SDC charges are?
They are called system development charges. And when, for an example, a developer comes in and builds a house, system development charges can range, depending on the community, anywhere from a couple $1,000s to upwards of $7,000 or $10,000 to $17,000 or $25,000.
$40,000, I think, in Bend.
Not surprising. But they are fees that are paid by the developer that are essentially passed on to the customers because that will be built into the cost of purchasing the home. But the system development charges are there to help capture the cost of what it is for that developer to continue to add to the infrastructure that you have for streets, water, sewer, and storm. And it's to help pay for some of the improvements to the system as a whole, even though they are just contributing to adding a certain house or a development area. But they help potentially pay for sewer main replacements or improvements in another part of the city that is at capacity. So if you need to replace a water main from a 4-inch line to a 6-inch line, SDCs are available for you to spend on the increase in improvement in efficiency. So whereas you may pay $1 million to replace a 4-inch line, it may be $1.5 million to do a 6-inch line. SDCs can pay for that difference to upcrease and increase the efficiency of a system. Does that help answer the question?
Yeah, but it looks like we have a big decrease in SDC revenue. Water, and so, yeah.
Correct. So we try and do our best to estimate what we think is going to come in the future years. It is 100% based on development that you have within your city's jurisdiction. So if we see that permits are starting to go down, building revenue is starting to go down, we would essentially see the same thing in SDC charges because you're having less developers come in, less people come in and pay those fees. So we see estimates coming in with a potential pending recession happening in the city, or not in the city, but in the country. We anticipate some of those effects being seen or shown in developers, even talking just generally in tariffs for things and costs that go up. The potential for building declines, and so the revenue goes down. So we try and be a little conservative on revenue, hoping that you're going to see more development in the city, but trying to take a more realistic look at what we anticipate for the next year. But it does boil down to essentially, it is a best guess of what we think development is going to be in the community. Any other questions or additional questions?
I just, I have heartburn over SDCs, and I know that we need the money to help cover the infrastructure, but we had a fair amount of revenue, and then we raised the SDC, and then we have a almost cut in half proposed. So I think we should think about that.
Typically, what you will see in cities is that when a new master plan is updated for whatever area, say it's water, sewer, or transportation, typically at that same time, you will have that contractor or another contractor come in to reevaluate the system development charges and identify as what those SDCs could be, as well as comparing them to neighboring communities to ensure that you are competitive. So that is a possibility that direction from the city council could give to staff as you're updating plans or newly updated plans to review those SDC rates with a professional contractor to come in and do those rate analysis.
I think the majority of folks in the past were concerned about letting some of those charges go, but my thought is if we lower it a little bit, they might build more, but maybe I'm wrong.
It's I'm not going to say it's a misconception because it's not. Essentially, you're lowering a fee for someone to come in and build a house or development or anything. So you are not wrong on your strategy. However, I would say that the practice of if you lower it or don't charge anything, they will come. And there's not a lot of cities that have seen additional development more than what was planned when they lower fees. This is, yes, it is a cost to the contractors and the builders and developers that come in, but this is a cost that at the end of the day is 100% passed on to the customer, the person buying the house. An additional $40,000 in bend may sound like a lot, but when you're paying $1.2 million for a house, another $40,000 to a homeowner may not be that significant of a difference. So that's an extreme example of we're in Bend. Whereas in a city, say like Forest Grove, where their SDCs over the last couple of years have risen from anywhere from about $18,000 up to $25,000, $30,000, that can make a difference on a homeowner. And as they look at potential opportunities for growth in the future, they may have opportunities for developers to build lower income or more condensed housing with incentives that could lower SDCs. So that is an opportunity you could look at if you want to increase the capacity of housing within your community. But I would leave that more towards your economic development director to have more in-depth discussions with you than me.
Chair, can I ask a
Go ahead.
question? So staff, when were SDCs raised, and when were the last time that they were evaluated compared to other communities? Yeah,
I don't know off the top of my head the last time that they were raised here. I can tell you
what
we
I
got.
sorry, let me clarify my
Oh,
question.
yes.
Where we had for the longest time only like $1,800 for a builder to as far as SDCs. So basically people were building, but we weren't able to keep up with the infrastructure needs. And so there was a vote, I don't know, Claire might know, when that like voting time was to actually come in and be more comparable with surrounding communities. But I wasn't clarifying like when was the last time they were raised, but like when that major time happened.
So we did an SDC study, I believe, in 2021, and the current rates were adopted after that study was done. It may have been early 22 when when the resolution was passed, but in that resolution, so they were pathetically low before. They were like $1,800 before then. And then the resolution to put in the new rate intentionally ramped up. It identified a target amount, and then it took, I believe, 3 years to get up to that point. So I believe the last time from outside the city, the perspective, the last time that they went up was, I believe, summer 24. And that was the final increase to get to that target level that was identified by the council back in 2021, I believe.
Just a follow-up question. Would you say we had a lot of building happening in the city of Sweet Home when we only had them at $1,800?
There, prior to that increase, there was a if I'm remembering correctly from my reports, we saw a bump in building around the same time as that increase. There wasn't really a lot of building activity happening in 2017, 2018, and then in 2019, 2020, 2021, we saw a large increase in the amount of building activity.
And there's like a housing development, this 153 unit being planned, and they're in process right now. Those SDCs that were estimated for this year, does that include that 153 housing development? Does it include what might
Not
be?
that I recall.
Okay, I'm just curious because that's a significant development.
I can try to confirm the timeline on that development.
Okay.
The other thing to note is with SDC funds, those are funds that can be used for updating master plans, as well as the costs of going out for those studies of SDC rates. SDCs can pay for those. So there is not a worry that the city would have to shell out additional. It's going to cost to do those rate analysis, but you do have funds available to pay for those if you choose to do so. It's not something that comes out of like the general fund. SDCs pay for those rate analysis.
Question back to SDCs. For our staff here, could we get a comparison of what like-sized cities are charging the state and what other communities within Lynn, Benton, Marion, and Lane County are charging? Just so we have a better idea.
I can try to have that for you tomorrow.
No. We don't need, I'm not saying like tomorrow.
Okay.
'Cause
Oh,
this
then
is-
absolutely.
This is not a
Not by tomorrow.
current budget thing. It's just for education for, everyone in the community. Because my biggest concern is not how little we can charge, is, we got these problems. We have road maintenance problems all over. We need all the funds that we can get. I don't want to be leaving money on the table that we could be using for our infrastructure and paving projects. So,
Councilor Bronson, I can chime in with a little bit of history on the previous study that was done. The 2021 study did include an examination of similar size cities and larger cities in our area and throughout Oregon. That study kind of showed that we were very much on the lowest end of the scale. And even with the increase that was identified there, we still remained pretty much lower than everybody in our region. So we're definitely lower than Lebanon. We're definitely lower than Albany. I have not been made aware of any reductions in SDCs in any city, and so I those numbers we should at least still be on the low end.
So it's going to be relatively easy to update those and bring that forth then.
Well, the SDCs, unfortunately, it's trying to find apples to apples comparisons, and every city does SDCs. I mean, they're regulated by state law. However, not every city has every system. And so we have all 5 systems in Sweet Home now. We used to have just water and wastewater. Now we have water, wastewater, parks, stormwater, and transportation. In some other cities, you might have a parks district or some other district that provides some of those things. And so they're not always as easy to identify as you might think. But if you only want to know about our county or Lynn and Benton County, it wouldn't be that difficult to get a rough idea of what they're charging.
And that's what I like, just, something out there. I mean, the obvious thing is we have huge expenses needed on our infrastructure for roads in particular. So, any revenue we can get is beneficial. I'm more concerned about shooting ourselves in the foot by not collecting enough to cover the cost of the additional wear and tear on the roads, than putting it down at such a low price, just to draw more housing in. So I'd like to be able to see, it's a business decision. The systems use charge is a piece of buying the home, but it's not the huge, like the structure itself, but it's a piece. I'm concerned that we are not charging a fair price for what we have here in Sweet Home.
Chair, may I say one more thing?
Go ahead.
So there's a fundamental difference of opinion when it comes to leaving money on the table. I believe that if we don't encourage incentives to build housing quickly, we don't have the opportunity to put those houses on the tax roll to receive that sort of property tax revenue to the city, and utilities that are being paid for by additional homeowners or renters that are spread across the city to share with the cost sharing thing. So there's multiple ways of potentially leaving money on the table. We have to try to come up with solutions together to not leave much on there, but try to cost share too. So and the housing crisis and the emergency on the housing issue is just, it's hard.
Any other questions that we can answer on SDCs? So you'll notice, as I mentioned, the change in philosophy for budgeting and appropriations this level. Most of the system development charges, you'll see a small amount in materials and services. This would help pay for like professional services, like contractors or professionals to come in and do master plans, as well as a small amount in capital outlay. This would be identifying any potential SDC projects that could potentially happen this year. The majority of funds in your SDCs are kept in unappropriated because we don't realistically see that you're going to spend those dollars in this next fiscal year. Any other questions on SDCs that we can answer before we move on? Okay. So after the SDC funds is our water fund. So the in your budget document, pages 32 and 33, within the water fund, you have two main departments, distribution and the water plant. I'll hand it over to Greg to talk about kind of high level what's going on in those departments this year and last year. And then I have a few slides just on rates for the budget committee. This is just purely informational of what potentially could go to city council. The intention of putting this into the budget committee slide was to get budget committee's opinion on if they believe there should be a look by the city council to look at rates. And then that will help give staff direction on whether we want to come back to city council to have those discussions. So I'll hand it off to Greg to talk about the world of water.
On the water side, we got the water distribution system that was outside of the plan, and then we have the plan. I think the main project that rose to the top of my list was the generator for the water treatment plant. I think we've talked about it enough that, we're now with the new wildfire maps that have come out. We live up in the beautiful trees. We also have pack power that is killing power on a notice during windy conditions. That's going to start occurring every summer or as needed, September, October. So when that happens, we cannot produce water when we do that. So we rely on our reservoirs. And so I feel for the biggest, safety net for this community is that we get a generator and we get it installed at some point. And so that's the one project we have. And I think that's just the grant money that we have available for this year. There will be no more personnel. I think we have everybody at the plants and in distribution. I did have a savings on the plant side this year of almost $200,000. And the reason for that is we're getting really good numbers out of finance. And 3 years ago, we took over these plants and we had an engineering firm kind of make assessments of what we would spend in each of these areas. And so we set budgets based off that. And we have good 3 years worth of numbers now. And so looking at each of those line items, you can see where I've made some of those changes and decreases, and I feel they're very accurate. And so I think that's a plus for the treatment side of things. On the distribution side, it's pretty much status quo. Leaks, changing out meters, parts. A lot of those parts we buy out of operating supplies. Yeah, and that's pretty much all I have. I think we're going to be doing one small extension of a water line. We may be doing that in-house. But other than that, I would entertain any questions you guys have or.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Just so it's out in the open, does this city have, for example, for fuel, do we just go down all of our city rigs, just go to Chevron and get fuel? Or do we have like a discount program? Do we have tanks available for us to pull off of?
So we used to have a fuel station on site when I started here, and it was kind of abandoned and it has issues, right? That we've used that all over the city. I think even PD at one time wanted to use that when Jeff Lynn was your boss. Talk about the fuel
I know we
stations.
talked about it, yeah.
Yeah, so we don't have any fuel on site. We might have some reserves, like a 55-gallon drum of diesel for our generator at Public Works. Pretty much all the vehicles go down to 18th and Main, right?
Pacific Pride.
Yeah.
And we have a contract with them where we pay 3% over their price, 3 cents over their price. We've tried a couple other fuel places and they can't even come close to what they've given us.
Okay. Because I mean, I don't want to look into the future, but if we were to get a major gas tax, that would affect most of these budgets. And so
Our fuel is tax exempt as well.
Okay, there you go.
I didn't know that. Thank you, Cindy.
I just wanted to build. I assumed that we were tax exempt, because we run tax exempt plates. But for the public that doesn't know, I just wanted to make it clear. So thank you.
Any other questions for Greg?
Not a question, it's an attaboy. Thanks for the savings that you put through by running a more efficient operation.
It's not only that, if you can have good numbers, you can write a great budget, right? And I think we've made some improvements over the last few years and it's just made a difference on our end. So,
I do have one more question, if I could.
Go ahead.
So the increase in chemical costs that I saw down there, is that because of the drawdowns and?
so that was based on actual usage. So those current numbers, but also a 3% increase for, their increase that they usually do every year. I did see recently that it's going, I believe, 0.357 per pound. It's going to 0.36, like 36 cents, like 1 cent per pound. It's going to go up. So our budget is in line with that.
And are we tracking anything like extra chemical costs or anything like that when the drawdown happens?
Always.
Yeah.
Always. I figured you were, but I just wanted to make sure it's said out loud that we are.
We are. So I'll just mention for everyone to be clear, I mentioned in the presentation, the water fund does have a debt service payment that goes through 2042. Those payment plans and arrangements is on page 16 for your knowledge. And then as Greg mentioned earlier, your capital improvement plan is the generator project. You also have, we included the capital improvement plan for the next few years. You can see the projects outlined in the capital improvement plan specifically for water. Nothing I would say is earth shattering, but they are a couple large projects coming up. And that's why we wanted to bring up the next couple slides as far as rate increases to kind of just show you as a budget committee and a council of where you are financially as a whole, as far as kind of, as I mentioned earlier, operating a business within the water fund. So if you go to the next slide there, you'll see two graphs, and I'll generally kind of explain the concepts behind the graph. The green line is revenue. The red line is expenses. The bars across the bottom are the beginning fund balance that you start with every single year. And then the yellow dotted line is your financial reserve policy for this fund. As I mentioned earlier, it's typically 3 months, 90 days. That's pretty standard across all cities and organizations that would be operating similar to a water fund. The utility rates were increased 2 years ago. That increase was done at 3% of an increase. That's roughly on average about $1.43 per month for customer. As it stands right now with the current master plan and capital improvement projects that you have outlined over the next few years, the water fund is healthy, does have enough funds to help pay for those projects as I've kind of forecasted out into the future of 2030. As a professional, I will always tell you that it is best practice to do slow, moderate, small increases every single year. It is completely up to the city council to make whatever decision you choose to do in the future. But as we've kind of shown the last few years ago, when you weren't doing rate increases, not doing rate increases every single year of even 1% or 2% means that you're not doing increases over those years. And then we get to a point where I came in 2022, did an analysis on some of your enterprise funds where you didn't have enough funding available to do capital projects. And so instead of doing a 1 or 2% increase, there are cities that have to do 10% or 15% or 20% or more because they're trying to play catch up because they didn't do slow, moderate increases every single year. So I will always tell you that is my recommendation. And I tell that to all of my clients, but it is ultimately up to the city council and the budget committee here to either make a recommendation for staff to come back to the city council for discussion, or the city council can decide at a later point that they may or may not want to review utility rates. I did do on the next slide, or actually, I'm sorry, can you go back to that one slide? So the top chart is showing what would happen if the city council decided to do a 2% rate increase. So this is similar, a little bit less than what was done a couple years ago. And you can see the difference in the blue bars. That's where you're going to see the increase or decrease in what funds are available. So in those far right years, 2029, 2030, you see in the above graph with the 2% increases, those ending fund bars are a little bit higher than what you show in the bottom graph. That bottom graph is showing if you do no increases at all over that time frame, what the ending fund balance is. So officially, I will tell you, you don't have to do rate increases in water funds. You are okay as long as your personnel services, your staffing, your materials and services stay consistent, as well as your capital projects that you have coming over the next 4 or 5 years, stay consistent with what we're showing right now. Any questions on that? So I will just jump to the next slide, which is a comparable of the cities around here. So we did comparisons with Stayton, Lebanon, Silverton, and Albany. You'll see that the dark blue is where the city of Sweet Home is currently right now and where they would be with 0% increases. If you decided to do, say, as an example, 2% rate increase, that would increase you to the $48.87. Not much of an increase or a difference in change in comparable cities. Any questions on those last couple slides that I can answer?
It's a question for Greg. So if we are, since we've been at the mercy of what the bureaucracy of the flow of the South Santiam and Middle Fork Santiam, the flush, if we have, some unforeseen expenses come up with that, how prepared are we financially to take another $1 million or $2 million hit? I mean, are we budgeting for that? I just don't trust what comes down, every fall that we're having to deal with this.
You have in reserve the typical 90 days, 30 months of a reserve policy. That is for the water fund. We have $350,000 in contingency and $2.6 million in unappropriated funds. For the type of events and situations that you're talking about, you would either have to make sure that you are move funds around to have more available in contingency, or if that event happened, you would have to drastically change your operations to reduce either materials and services or personnel services to account for those changes.
Thank you. Just another reason why to keep, 2-3% each year going up. Thanks.
Any other questions for the waterfront? Okay. So next is the sewer wastewater fund, pages 34 and 35. Again, similar to the water fund, you have two departments within this fund, the treatment plant and then the sewer collections. I'll mention briefly before handing it over to Greg, there are two debt service agreements, one that is paid out fully in 2031 and 2035, so somewhat in the near future. And then I will mention, we'll talk a little bit about this later as far as capital project funds. Obviously, the WIFIA loan and those types of capital projects has a huge fluctuation within this fund and what happens, especially with what capital projects you have outgoing into the future. So a little bit more fuzzy on what the future outlook is just based on what we know right now. But again, I did do those comparisons for the rate increases so you can see comparables of where you are to some of the other cities. So with that, I'll hand it off to Greg to talk all things wastewater.
Well, we're working on getting our all of our information sent in so we can get the application completed and start the project. I think that's our biggest goal for the wastewater side. As for operations, we are pretty much status quo. I think one point of discussion is that when we lost our utilities manager, he took his state certifications with him. Since then, we have cultivated our water treatment plant in-house with Jaeger Howard. And currently for the wastewater side, we contract with somebody to legally oversee our plant and still allows our staff to work. And we've been paying that on a 6-month basis. It runs about $30,000 for every 6 months. I think that we've had some internal discussion that at some point we're going to need somebody that has the certification to run that plant as we get into the construction of it. And I think it would be a good discussion to add an FTE and do away with that contract because we could pay for the majority of that. And I think we've got some sort of a plan. That would be the only change that I would propose going forward. And that's just putting more expertise at the wastewater plant. Last year, I spent a good amount of my time at that wastewater plant, and we made quite a bit of changes in-house to the existing facility. Some of the things that we did, we completed the $7 million project and put in all brand new sludge screw press and a sludge tank, and we got that project done in a timeline. We spent the lottery funds that were given from the state, and that has made a big difference because we're not storing our biomass in our system. In other words, our tank or our clarifiers. We can actually remove that on a regular basis and get it in a tank and not, if you can imagine you're creating an environment where you want to create your bugs work. You don't want to starve them and you don't want to overfeed them, right? So you have to kind of create this scenario for them. And so by doing that, that made a lot of opportunities for us to get our bugs a little bit more happy. The second things that we did is we purchased a couple of units, Triton units from City of Lebanon, and we cleaned out each tank last summer and dropped each of those hurricane units in each tank. And it was approved by DEQ under a supplemental oxygen project. And we did that, and we instantly saw results once we completed that. We also added new filter sand into our outfall filters, which is just big giant buckets of sand and certain types of sand, silica sand and other things. We also put in a new return pump. We also rebuilt our waste pumps. And so if you're looking at the wastewater plant as a whole, we've looked at every section to try to make improvements to extend its life. Since August, we've had 2 system overflows, and that's just based off rain events that we just had too much flow that came into our lift station. But the plant survived. We haven't violated since August, since we've done all that work. And that's a process violation. That's where our plant can't remove the bacteria in a certain way. And so I'm proud of that, and I think the staff is proud of that. But I think that's only one step of keeping that operating for the next 3 years as we construct a new plant. And so that's kind of where I'm at with that plant and expertise, and I think it would be good for our future to at least head in that direction. So I know we've had those discussions. So other than that, I'm sure you guys have some questions for me.
I have a
Be
question.
free to answer those.
You
Go ahead.
mentioned adding another FTE.
Yes.
Are you recommending it for this coming fiscal year or the next fiscal year?
I think we're looking at this upcoming fiscal year because of the contract that we have to have. We have to have that grade 3. And right now I've got a guy that 2 people that are scheduled to take their 2. I don't have a grade 3. And when we build a new plant, we're going to have a level 4 certification. So, I think thinking ahead and starting to build towards that direction is not a bad idea. But also the fact that we're already halfway there paying for somebody for doing that, even though we've gotten plenty of expertise, training. The guys have learned so much from Mark. And so it's been a great experience kind of breaking the mold from the last Jacobs and our last manager and now running the plant completely different. And so I think just building on that would be something that would be a recommendation to me.
Follow-up question?
Go ahead.
I just want to say, we've been so blessed to have you, Greg, and you getting us out of that other contract that we had with Jacobson, but also elevating local guys to earn those certifications and do and succeed at a job, but also just all of those improvements you've made to our plant and the fact that we have not been in violation. Thank you so much. It's been something that I know you've been trying to improve since you got here. So thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Greg? Okay, so we'll move on to the next slide, which is the forecast and utility rates. Because of the complexities of the WIFIA loan and the sewer treatment plant, you'll see that in the chart that I'm showing, the forecasted years out 2027 and forward are pretty flat. Nothing really changes. And that's because of so much unknown factors and variables that go into the WIFIA loan of how much, what the rate increases, what the payback agreement is going to be. So 2 years ago, the city council elected to increase the rates 3%. The only capital project that we have identified is the treatment plant. And so until we finalize what that information is, I'm not comfortable giving any recommendations to change any kind of sewer rates because there are so many variables and these variables are very large. And so once we get that information back and identify what the specific actuals are for that loan agreement, then we will come back to the city council for a rate adjustment. I can guarantee you that. But what that rate adjustment may be to be able to afford to make the payments over the term of the loan will be completely up to the state agreement and what variables are in that agreement. So, so not making any recommendations for changes to utility rates. If you go to the next slide, similar to the water fund, I wanted to at least identify comparable cities. So again, looking at Albany, Portland, Hero, Lebanon, Silverton, and Staten, those sewer utility rates in comparison to where the city of Sweet Home is right now on the lower end, very competitive. So again, not recommending any changes. Any questions for the wastewater fund?
Chair, may I?
Go ahead.
Okay, so my recollection was that we had to prove to the agency that we were able to make repayment based upon utility increases. So is that a different loan? Is that
No, that's the same loan. What I'm waiting for is the actual application to be done so that we can get the information on what the actual interest and loan payments would be, because I'm not able to forward what we're going to pay in the future if I don't know what that payment is. So if I don't know what the payment is, I can't tell you what the rates need to be able to make that payment. So we won't know that until we get it further into the application process.
I guess I'm confused because I thought that we knew, and I thought we had voted to strategically increase across the board. Maybe I'm wrong, on an annual basis to make sure that we could cover that, not have this hefty increase. So I don't quite understand.
My understanding was that the WIFIA loan that you were going out before was a couple years ago when we were starting to look and gather initial information. We did have to do a proposal when we started the application process, but we weren't able to complete the application process because we didn't have the necessary financial statements prepared. And so the WIFIA loan application process was put on hold until we can complete the fiscal year 23 audit. And then we'll reapply, get updated information. The rates that you received a couple years ago will likely not be the same rates that you're going to receive in the future when you reapply for the loan.
Huh. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions for the wastewater fund? Hey, the next fund is the storm fund, a little bit smaller than water and sewer, but on page 36 on the presentation here, you can see a summary of the information here. And then I will mention the capital outlay projects next year include a main replacement on 3rd Avenue. That is the $250,000 that is appropriated in next year's budget. And with that, I guess I will hand it off to Greg again to speak on the storm fund.
I don't think I have an FTE. I don't have really much operational supplies. I think we can ask any questions we want, but this fund is still in its infancy for the most. I mean, I think 3 years ago we were maybe $1 or $2. I think we're up to $4 now. And so you kind of, what you have in for you is what our projects is, but we just doing a little bit of work. We're not much other things.
Chair, may I? So
Go ahead.
was this money for a plan? Were we supposed to be doing a storm plan?
That's 18th, right? Is that part of the lid with the stormwater?
No, my master plan, I'm sorry, Greg, was the funds that maybe I'm misunderstanding, but I thought that we needed a master plan for the storm water system. Am I remembering wrong?
So that's been completed.
Okay.
It was completed this last fiscal year. And I think that was brought before you recently
I
with the
can't
water
remember
plan.
everything.
You know, I know it's a lot, but we've been working on all the plans. We got the water plan done, then we got the stormwater plan, and I know they're working on the transportation plan, and then the parks plans. So it was completed this last fiscal year.
And so that's not in this because it's already done. So this is
Correct.
for good projects. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I think just more to support what we're doing, you know, in our town, but also I think there's some concern with the future lid project down on the 18th and stuff like that. There's some stormwater work that has to be done there.
So I'll go into a little more detail in the next couple slides because that will probably answer some additional questions to capital improvement projects outlined. So you did complete a master plan. It did identify some future projects, specifically in the capital improvement plan. In the document that you have 3 main capital projects that are identified. The first one being the $250,000 for the 3rd Avenue main replacement. On the potential docket for next year or next year is another $250,000 for 6th Avenue main replacement. And then you have a large capital project for a 12th Avenue upgrade in a few years that is scheduled. That identified cost is potentially $650,000. The storm fund is, as Greg mentioned, in its infancy stages and very small. It does pay for a small portion of Public Works employees that do work in the storm capacity. It does have a small amount of operating supplies. It pays for a portion of general insurance for those employees and liability insurance for the Public Works in general. And then it also pays a support service charges similar to other funds that go back into the general fund. This helps pay for a shared cost of like financial services or administration for the work that they do in helping pay bills or process payroll for those employees in Public Works. But if you go to the next slide in the presentation, this is a potential outlook if you were to try and complete those 3 capital projects in the course of the next 3 years. You would not be able to financially complete those projects without increasing revenue in some capacity. That means either rate increases, going out for a loan and paying it back over a longer term, or pushing out capital projects and not doing them until you have efficient funds to do so. So if you were to do those 3 capital projects, 250 this next year, 250 and then 650 with no rate increases, that is what you see here in the graph where you see us going below the reserve policy, which is the dotted yellow line in 2028, and then going negative in 2029 and 2030 because of that large 3rd year project of the $650,000. So 2 years ago when we did rate increases, as Greg mentioned, it was $1. You increased it to $4. If you go to the next slide, I have a couple different options here just to show you some possibilities. This next slide here is assuming that the city council wants to take a stance of paying for projects in cash. And to do that and remain on the same schedule that you have in the capital improvement plan, doing one project every single year, you would have to raise rates from $4 to $8 starting this July to be able to cash flow those projects over the next few years. You could, knowing that you only have 3 projects in your master plan, you could pass a rate from $4 to $8 until you completed those projects. And then you could include in the resolution that the rate goes back down to $4 after those projects are completed. The next few years of collecting that $8 would essentially build up your cash reserves. you spend the dollars in the projects, and then until you have more future projects to do, you could maintain that $4 rate. That is an option for the city council that you could consider. So this is showing that opportunity here in the graph picture that you see there. If you go to the next plan, with the $4 rate that you have right now, you can cash flow the next 2 years of capital projects. So the 2 projects that are $250,000. You would not be able to fund the $650. This graph is showing the option of taking out a loan to do that project in the 3rd year, and with an assumption of a 5% interest rate that you would have to pay back in what I'm assuming is over the next 10 years. You would need to increase your rates to $6.75 as opposed to what you are right now with $4. So this is showing that representation. You do see in the 2028 that you do drop below your reserve policy. However, that's not a deterrent for you to stop or say that you can't spend or you need to make adjustments. It's a policy that you can break with the knowledge that I have communicated to the city council that you are dropping your reserve policy, and I can show you that here's what we're doing to rectify that problem and increase the reserve policy to get back up. So that's stated in your policy documents that if you drop below, or I believe you're going to drop below your policy, that we work with city staff and city council to identify a plan to get back to meeting that reserve policy. So as you see in the next couple of years in 2029 and 2030, you build up those cash reserves again to maintain that reserve policy. But this is another option that the city council could consider. I'm going to show you one more option, which is, I would say, very typical of cities when they look at capital projects that they may not be able to fund, and that is to just defer projects and not do them. So as I mentioned, you have enough cash with $4 that you could complete the 2 projects for $250,000 over the next couple years as a safety net, if that is the decision that the city council wants to move forward with. I would recommend, just to give you a little bit of a buffer, to increase rates to $4.75 versus the $4. That will ensure that in case those capital projects go over a little bit, you have a little bit of a buffer or contingency to keep you above the reserve policy that is shown in the dotted yellow line there. So this option shows that you're deferring that $650,000 project for a future timeline, or if you get grant funds specifically for that project that can be spent. So that option is another option for consideration. If you go to the next slide, this shows you the 2 polar extremes. So I mentioned you could do nothing and keep everything at $4. You could potentially increase your rates to $8. That would be going back to the first option that I showed you, where you cash every project over the next few years. So this shows you where you would be in comparison to other cities with a storm utility comparison rate. Again, this is not a decision that you have to make today. It's not a decision you have to make this month. But I am bringing this to your attention that if you want to complete those capital projects over the next few years and prepare to pay for that $650,000 project, you need to start thinking about that now and making plans and adjustments for what that plan is going to be able to do that project. If it is a project that is identified by the city council that you don't want to do, or you're okay with deferring to the extent that you can, then that is an opportunity for the council to discuss and decide at a later date. But I wanted to bring this information to you so you have it, so at least you're knowledgeable about what's going on. Any questions that I can answer about any of those options?
Go ahead.
Would it be theoretical to do kind of a combination of, instead of just hiking the rates up 4, do 1 or 2, and then for that bigger project, maybe taking a loan out for, half of what it is, just kind of build up and then take a loan out for the remaining.
Anything is on the table. You could even decide if you wanted to, you're going to, instead of doing those projects as year 1, year 2, year 3, you could do one next year and then wait 2 years and do another one and then wait another 3 or 4 years to do that big project. So you can defer projects. A capital improvement plan is only that. It's a plan. It's not set in stone unless you have critical infrastructure needs that you have to do that project and it needs to be done as soon as possible. It would be up to the city council with any recommendations from staff on what you could do as far as, yeah, this is a project, it needs to get done, but it's not critical enough that it has to be done in years 2 and 3. Staff could keep an eye on it, address it as we go through every year. Each year that we do a budget, we update the capital improvement plan. So if something changes, we can update it on a yearly basis, keep you informed on where that project is on the docket. I've seen plenty of cities that will defer projects and they will stay on the deferred list for years, or at least until they find a grant to help pay for it. So that is completely possible. It's up to the recommendation of your public works director, your city manager, deputy city manager, and the city council to decide what the best course of action that you feel is for your city.
Chair.
Go ahead.
I get a little uncomfortable when cities defer just because of our wastewater facility was deferred for so long. That I get a little nervous about that. Although being wise about our improvements, we do need to be wise about that and the burden on our constituents. But seeing the wastewater facility, yeah, it's costing us a lot now because it was deferred for so long.
Chair, may I? So, from the way that I see it, the community members that pay these utility fees, they see one bill for water and they have this blanket cost. And so that's why I was really adamant that we have some sort of public relations campaign to try to explain this, or more communication, because what it sounds like to me is we're going to have to raise the fees across the board. And how much is that total dollar going to be with the maximum amount of increases that we could potentially do? Because I know that there's a city next door that wanted a $14 utility fee increase. And so if we're going to start, $4 here and $3 here and $6 here, and we don't know how much, we got to really figure out how to message this. And I don't feel like they are getting a good water quality because of these stupid drawdowns to make them comfortable paying all of these increases. So I hope that we can figure out small, incremental, and a good message.
Any other questions or comments? As I mentioned, the utility rates are not something that you need to decide tonight or tomorrow. It's not something that needs to be decided next week or next month. But it is something that I at least want to make you aware of on a regular basis of where the rates are, where the capital projects are, where your funding streams are, and your financial stability in the enterprise funds.
Okay, just to review things here. For the 25-26 budget that we're working on right now, what rate do you have plugged in for stormwater?
$4.
$4. And it's currently
$4.
$4. So, but leaving it, we're okay this year, right?
You are
$4.
okay this year. Whatever you defer, whatever you decide not to increase this year is less money available to spend in the future. If you increase the rate in July, you're building up those cash reserves over the next few years to be able to pay cash potentially for your capital projects in the future. So every year that you defer is less money that you have available in the future. And potentially, let's say you're going to do that project in year 3, no matter what. Well, if we take a year off of those payments, that means instead of $8 for 3 years, that means it's going to be $12 or $13 for 2 years, or a higher amount for 1 year.
But your recommendation is go from 4 to 8.
I would not say that is my full recommendation. It depends really on what you decide as a council is best appropriate for the projects on your list. If you decide that that third year project, the $650,000 project, based on any recommendation that we can grab from a professional source, your public works director, administration, your staff, on what they feel is the capacity of that main replacement or whatever we're doing. If they feel that, yes, it's on the list, it should be done. It's not something that needs to be done right away though, or we can keep an eye on it over the next couple of years to make sure it doesn't, fall into disarray and have to be this emergency replacement. So I'm not comfortable giving you a recommendation on, yes, $8, yes, $6.75, and take out a loan for 10 years to do this. What needs to be identified is reviewing the master plan with city council. Where are you comfortable as a council? Because it is ultimately your decision as a city council on how you want to move forward and direct staff how to spend those funds and what capital projects to do or not do. So based on what the council would give direction for staff is how I would present my recommendation in the future.
Thank you. Sounds like we have a lot to talk about as a council.
Any other questions or comments on the storm fund? Okay. I really only have 2 more slides, and they're really small, so we can get through them pretty quick. We do have a second meeting tomorrow where I think we're going to bring back some additional information for you, but I'll go through the next couple slides, and then I'll leave it up to Chief Ogden and the Budget Committee on how you want to move forward. So the next slide is the Economic Development Fund, page 37. Again, a really small amount of funds that are available. In the past, this has been used for grants to local businesses and other projects and programs that go on within the city, potential small grant projects, those types of things. I believe, if I recall, and Blair can correct me if I'm wrong, but this fund initially started with a grant and funds from previous years that has just kind of been dwindled away over the years of you've been giving grants away to businesses and other projects that are going on. So we're seeing kind of the tail end of those projects and available funds appropriated. So happy to answer any questions on the Economic Development Fund that you may have.
Chair, may I?
Go ahead.
When you said dwindled, it made me sad. I just want to say reinvest in the community. I like that a little bit better.
I am 100% positive that those funds were invested and reinvested in the community for great projects. However, you're starting to see less of those funds come available, which means you will not have as much funding available to do those revitalization projects in the future.
So we received a grant. And I don't think the administration right now has many grants available, but is there more grant funding that we can find to refill that, or?
We can certainly look, but it actually was not started through a grant. It was through a home loan program. So as those repayments came in, that infused this fund. But there are very few of those left on the books, and they come in pretty sporadically. So as they come in, they will keep going back in this fund, and we can reopen those applications. But right now, it's not really happening.
See, I looked at Blair. I should have just looked to you. Any other questions? So the $35,000 or so in this account is, again, fully appropriated to spend. We've put it into line items for projects and programs and grant recipients. But if those numbers fluctuate and we need more in one line item, city staff is free to do that because you're giving appropriations at the full $35,000 level. So any other questions that we can answer? Okay, so the last fund is the reserve fund, which is at 0. over the last couple years, we've made a couple transfers. The largest change has happened in 22, 23, and 23, 24 when we did some restructuring of the financials. You'll notice in the actuals, if you look at the budget document back in 22, 23, you had just under just under $800,000 in the account. We did a transfer out of $300,000 in 23, 24. That went into the Willow Fund to start kind of seeding that project with the intention that when you get the loan for doing those projects, when you get those funds in, it would be up to the city council if you wanted to direct those funds back to the reserve fund to pay it back, so to speak. But that is completely up to the discretion of the city council. During our course of the last couple of years of going through audits, we've identified funds that were intended to be for the library. So those would be some of the donation funds that they received for a potential new building. We were having trouble in the earlier years when I started trying to track those funds down to figure out where they were put. Eventually, we found those funds in the reserve fund. So what we have done is transferred those funds to the library fund to ensure that they are spent and kept in the intended purpose, and they're not spent on anything else. With that, you'll see through a supplemental budget for this current year that we'll be expending all of those funds this year, which is why you have a zero fund balance going into this next year for 25, 26. Any questions that I can answer about that? So with that being said, the next few slides are to open a public hearing to hear any public comment specifically related to revenue sharing. You're free to do that at this time if you'd like. And members of the public.
Point of order. We can't open a public hearing right now because we don't have a quorum
anymore. Yes.
It's actually agendized for tomorrow. So that's
ORS
perfect.
rules. I love that. Okay, so I will leave it back to Chief Ogden and the budget committee to convene or adjourn for the evening, I guess.
I think that's what all of us were
Can I just adjourn us? Adjourned, whatever time it is, we're done. Do we think we'll have a real budget committee tomorrow night?